Well, I'm Michiel van Driessen from Felixx Landscape Architects in Planning. This is Ledian Bregazi. He is architect at the Innovation Factory of Polis University. And we would like to share another story on Berat with you today. The competition for Berat Island seeks for resilient innovations. This picture is showing a tree during a storm. And you can see that it's able to withstand this storm by bending, but afterwards it can stretch back to its normal straight position. And this is actually showing the essence of resiliency, how a system copes and recovers when it's experiencing extreme conditions which actually go beyond their initial design criteria. Today, resiliency seems to be becoming the next buzzword after sustainability, which is used for many projects. But unlike sustainability, resiliency has a solid body of scientific work in both engineering and ecology. So therefore, to come to resilient innovations for Berat, this project should not be approached as a sheer design task, but should rather investigate in understanding the hydrological system behind the Osun River and developing models and tools to optimize this system. Extensive scientific models have been developed in the past, addressing the resiliency of rivers and their embankment areas. We have integrated this knowledge in our proposal to develop the Osun Riverscape as a resilient water system, rather than designing it as a riverfront, which is, in the end, as we believe, resulting in an enchanting riverbank for Berat. To be able to capitalize this existing scientific body on resiliency, the consortium consists of three main parties: an environmental planning office and two scientific institutions. The first partner is UNESCO IHE, which is a UNESCO-supported research institution. It's the flood resilience group of the university in Delft. And they're involved in many different projects addressing flood resiliency all over the world. The second party is Polis University, which is strongly embedded in the Albanian culture and has experience in urban development strategies in the Albanian context and also abroad. And the third party is Felixx. It's a landscape architecture firm which has experience and is working on many different projects to integrate scientific models, scientific knowledge into integrated spatial strategies. So, well, today we represent this team. Unfortunately, William from UNESCO IHE can't join today, but we are really happy actually to share our thoughts and to show you our proposal for Berat. The seasonal discharge of the Osun River is large. In summer, the river is barely maintaining a small stream, and the riverbed is filled with sandbanks which are covered with low-quality vegetation and deposited litter. While during spring, the steep riverbed of the Osun is causing extreme high water levels, which actually almost mimic those of flash floods. Thus, coping with such extremes requires a design which can accommodate both abundancy and a lack of water. And these observations are changing the focus of the task, because the issue is not only how to make Berat resilient for floods and high water, but also, and maybe even more importantly, how to maintain the river in summer when there is almost no water. Due to the seasonal difference in the river's discharge, the morphology of the islands is continually changing. Although this can be seen as a characteristic of the area and of the islands, it actually limits and even prevents any use of the riverbed by the city. And the hydrology of the Osun River defines to a large extent actually Berat's problematic position. Located on elevated and quite steep riverbanks, the city is well prepared to cope with high water levels. Flood is an issue which is merely occurring in the areas which are more downstream. But during periods of low flow, the city is actually not able to capitalize its position along the river. So to capitalize this position along the river, we actually have to steer and to guide the river in order that you create a river which is able to add spatial quality in every season, even when there is low water and both when there is high water. In summer, we could create a concentrated river and large flowering islands could emerge in the riverbed. When the water level is rising, these flowering islands could transform into a mosaic of wetlands in the river. And even when the water level is reaching its highest stages, still a few small islands could be preserved within the riverbed. We are able to do this. It's possible to create a better guidance of the river by combining a set of small interventions with the potential building capacity of the river flow. Control the erosion and deposition of the river sediments to create both channels and sandbanks in the river. Thus, actually, by carefully positioning structures in the riverbed, we are able to use the river to build up the islands. And that's actually what we call building with nature. And currently, enough scientific knowledge is available to create computer and even physical models that can mimic the real-time situation. So they help us to determine the exact location, the position, the shape, and the size of the objects that we have to put in the riverbed to create the required and the desired sedimentation in the river. Just by manipulating the river flow patterns and building with this, of using this building with nature approach, provides us the tools to develop several design strategies. Design strategies which are not only improving the resiliency of the riverbed, both in drought and in flood seasons, but they are also enhancing the usability of the river by actually providing a more stable base for use. By guiding the river with the first system of curbs, we ensure a minimal and steady base flow of a river, most predominantly along the city of Berat. And meanwhile, these curbs they're actually creating the contours of a first terrace level. On top of that, we add a second structure of curbs, which are slightly higher, and they are protecting actually the crests of the existing sandbanks, so that they can be preserved as stable islands even when the water level is high. And by careful positioning these two structures, we are able to create and to use the river to create islands which are able to grow and to shrink, so that they can reach a maximal footprint when the water level is low, and a minimal footprint when the water level is high. But apart from using these annual fluctuations in the river, we also have to prepare for extremes. As we are integrating the river in the city, it's important to develop an early warning system for Berat, and also to establish this warning within the city. A bridge, which is used to connect the islands to the riverbanks, could be opened hours before actually the flash floods or the high water is coming. And in such a way, the bridge actually prevents the accessibility of the islands during these periods. But opening the bridge could also become a symbolic act, which actually strengthens and raises the awareness of the people in the city of their relation and their connection with the city, with the river as a water system. So these main focal points, they actually provide us the framework from which we develop the design. We have a concentrated river. We have a first terrace level with dynamic and seasonal gardens. And we have a second terrace level with more stable islands. During summer, Berat becomes alive. The city is vibrant and tourism is flourishing, so also the riverscape should become part of the city's scenery. A low curb in the riverbed directs the modest base flow into a single stream, predominantly along the quay of the city's waterfront. The curb is widened to create a walkway, actually a second quay, which is going along and through the summer version of the Osun River. This new second quay is connected to the riverbanks via a new bridge. And apart from being a walkway, this curb is also creating the contours of the largest set of the islands, the areas which become available when the sandbanks dry out during summer. In this period of the year, they are filled and they're grown with a vegetation of flowers and herbs, and they're crisscrossed with mown walking paths. And within this sea of flowers, you can recognize actually the second plateau, or the second set of terraces, which are protected by the second curb system. This second curb system protects them even when the water level is higher. So actually that also means that the possibilities for vegetation are larger over there. So there we can imagine a vegetation of shrubs and trees and longer grassland. These areas can be used for inhabitants to gather and to go there, but also it's a place where festivities could be organized. The tail of the islands, which is, unlike the head of the islands, not protected by these curbs, is dynamic. And it's kind of fluctuating, it's growing and it's shrinking, depending on the sedimentation of the river during the winter and spring. During winter and spring, the discharge level of the Osun River is higher and is rising. So the lowest curb level is overflown at specific points, which actually means that the summer version of the Osun River is widened and enlarged. The summer gardens are now gradually overflown and transforming into seasonal wetlands. So the flower beds are overflown with small streams and ponds, and the reed vegetation is growing. The level of inundation in these wetlands actually depends on the discharge level of the river, so which actually means that we have a continually and daily changing landscape within this terrace zone. And this first terrace level stays accessible through a set of boardwalks and also the combination of the walking paths on top of the curbs. The higher island, as you can see, stays also protected during this time of the year and is in that way also preserved. Although during this season we could imagine that the lawns are not maintained so intensively, so actually that you create a safe haven for birds and animals during this season. At specific moments and times of the, during winter and spring, the Osun is reaching its highest stages, which actually means that the first curb level and also the first terrace level is completely overflown and only a small set of islands remains, the ones which are protected by the second curb system. These islands are at this moment no longer accessible for people, which actually means that they become a last resort for animals and birds during this period of the year where the river becomes very formidable and almost covers the entire cross-section of the river. During peak discharge levels, which occur once in the 10 years, even this higher and elevated winter islands will be overflown. Therefore, it's really important that the level of these winter islands never exceeds the level of the quays, so in order that they can be submerged and that we can realize the required discharge capacity within the river basin without causing flood issues for the Berat City. During these particular floods, the curb system and the walls are protecting the terraces from being washed out during the strong stream during this period. By tuning the hydrological system of the river, we were able to create seasonal isles and to transform the Osun River into a riverscape, which is adding qualities to the city, different qualities in every season. And actually, by creating a stable river, the river itself can become the connection between the two sides of the city by the walking paths and the circulation structures which are part of these islands. And we can even program them because we know which areas are stable and which ones are seasonal. So we could imagine that there are recreational functions in the more northern island, which are related to the historical center around it. That we have more neighborhood facilities in the south, related to the residential area along it. And there might even be a central island in the middle, which is not accessible for people, and celebrating the ecology and the diversity within the area.
So at the end, through a calibrated intervention, we can have the islands that emerge. They are not built, but they emerge through a molding of the morphology of the river itself. And in this way, we could add quality to a city that already has a lot of it. The river itself and the islands created in this way can work together in tandem, and the river and the island finally can turn back into the public domain and in the public realm. The northern island can serve as a place where mostly tourists, but also people that visit and live in Berat can use it frequently, while the southern island can have facilities that serve more to the inhabitants of Berat, adding facilities that are lacking at the moment, while the central island can stay, since it is not always accessible to people. It can become a real stepping stone in the ecological sense of the term. So, by framing with nature the cultural heritage already present in Berat, we can create a safe river, and we can also celebrate a river and an island that are no longer a threat to the city itself. Thank you.
I do see this project as an extended green area of the city. So as you said, this riverscape, right? The concern I would have is, do you think that it's going to increase the maintenance costs for the municipality to maintain such a green area in the river during the summertime mostly? Because in these pictures, which looks very nice, it should be like that. Otherwise, if it is like a wild one, I don't see the reason why people would go to that island instead of staying to the city. So that's my concern. So why the people would go there, and if so, it's going to be like this? What do you think is going to cost to the city to maintain such a idea?
Well, I think anyway, if we want to change the situation, which is now the situation, I mean, it's an area which does not cost any maintenance, but it's also not usable. So I think if you want to make the area usable, it will anyway increase the maintenance costs. And I think the islands that we show, they of course they need maintenance. They are cultural landscapes that we create. But I think this can be tuned, and of course this can be reduced to a normal and even a low level, because maintaining these flower areas and these wetlands, the maintenance that you need to do is mowing the reed vegetation maybe once or twice a year. So I think this is quite well, it should not be the crazy expensive maintenance cost, so to say.
Thank you for your presentation. I didn't quite understand what happens when it's really high tide, like the once in a 10-year. So what happens to the city, the site of the city, to the boulevard? Is that well protected?
Yes. Yeah, that's what we showed, and what's maybe it's not really visible on the screen, but it's better visible on the panels. Is that we what's really important is that the level of the islands never exceeds the level of the case, so that the islands can be submerged instead of the case. So in that sense, the case is still dry, and the islands actually cover the capacity which is required. So because now what you can see, the existing islands, they're sometimes higher than the case. So that's something which should be changed in this situation in order to protect the city for these once in a 10-year floods. I would like to add one thing to that. Of course, there are not so many flood issues for Berat, but we didn't really focus. I think, of course, there are flood issues for the Osum River, but what we not intended to focus on these ones, especially because flooding is not the biggest problem of Berat. It's more downstream, and also to actually make the whole river resilient and flood protected. That's something what we believe that has to be done on a regional scale, and also maybe in areas which are not urbanized, especially because there you can, as already some colleagues showed, widen the riverbed and create areas where you can store the water for a longer period. But the flood risk for Berat is tackled with this intervention.
So in relation to what you just said, thanks for the presentation. Which part of the river did you actually do research on? Because if I understood well, you ran several scenarios through computer simulations.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what you ran through the simulations and which part of the river you've come? And connected to that, how sure you are that what you are proposing is really doable, feasible?
Yes. Well, we have run actually simulation models. Of course, with the data that we have, this should be refined and tailored in possible cases. But we have looked at the whole Osum River bed and actually the whole catchment area of the river to see where actually the main flood risks are, and they did not appear to be in Berat itself with Lower. So that's actually the scale where we did simulations on. And besides, we also did, again, when we were kind of trying these interventions, we did a simulation using these flood patterns from the whole river basin and applying them actually on the zoom that you can see over here, how it works and if it works. And from these models, it appeared that the issues which are actually relevant for Berat are covered.
Except the bridge, there is any other artistic intervention in all these things?
Well,
the bridge is the landmark of our project. We needed to have a distinctive landmark that is that can become part of Berati public realm and also can act as a early warning element. But beside that bridge, we also intend to propose temporary intervention in the temporary intervention in the island that emerge according to our simulation. But since the activities that will be occurring or held in the island, since they are temporary, mainly focused during the summer period or the period where the touristic fluxes are higher, also the intervention are kind of temporary, as you can see. And our main focus was to create opportunities, not to create opportunities for Berat through very small intervention in the river, and not to create something that can be can create also risks if it is put inside the river. So most of the intervention are temporary and tent like, and they can welcome fairs or concerts, shows.
I would like to add something to that as well. I think the artistic interventions, I mean, I think it's clear that the bridge is the most obvious one. But I think the way that how we intend the islands, by making these Capian walls, which can also be filled with local stone, which another colleague showed today already. I think this can be seen as and of course the design can be refined. But you could see this as well as a land art, which is actually celebrating this combination between a cultural intervention in a UNESCO heritage site with a kind of natural development which is constantly kind of changing the position and also the kind of shape of this land art installation. And I think that's actually the main intervention that we do.
Sorry. What is clear for me is that this structure that you're creating can support and prevent the floating of the islands. But I'm not sure, I didn't understand if this is going in some way to support the relationship with the cities, how these barriers can prevent the water to enter in the boulevard. Because this is protecting the island, but are they protecting the city?
Yes, they do.
How?
Well, by lowering the islands in the middle, the islands can be submerged first instead of the city. And in such a way, actually, it's possible to kind of facilitate the required discharge capacity within the river basin. And it can be kind of better spread over the river basin. It's not kind of concentrated on one particular spot. And in such a way, it actually prevents the cave from flooding. And well, also what was kind of clear from the models that we've run is that this flood risk for Berat, I mean, of course it's there, but this peak discharge levels doesn't mean that Berat is flooded every 10 years. Because this flood risk is not so high.
So what you're suggesting is to repeat the same structure in other part of the rivers?
Yeah, that could be.
It's not only in Berat.
No. And if you would really want effectively kind of lower the discharge level of the river, which is not necessary for Berat, but maybe for other areas downstream, then you have to do the interventions of some of the colleagues earlier, that you create these basins upstream where the water can be stored. But that's another story on a regional scale level, and that's not necessarily in favor of Berat today.
Thank you.
Please.
One more question. Out of curiosity, how long does it take before the sediments show or your structure captures the sediments, and how long does it take before you can see the first results?
Well, I think you could, it kind of touches another part, the fact that this project is quite easy to face. I mean, you don't have to, we have now kind of developed a set of islands. You can also change this amount and kind of reduce it. Of course, you have to run these hydrological models again. But how we have positioned them at the moment is that they are based on the existing sandbanks. So in that sense, you will immediately see we don't start from scratch. The areas that we mark as the second terrace layer, which is the highest layer, they are already the highest parts of the river. So in that sense, the first thing you will see from the river is actually the fact that it's excavating and this kind of control erosion, which you will immediately see. Maybe less during summer, but for sure after the first season, winter and spring.